Hi, and welcome back to Logistics Technology. I'm Marshall from Ask Marsh. We just had the quick intro video, which you may have seen. If not, I'm going to take you through an 11-step process or 11 areas we look at in logistics and technology making. The goal of which is to stop companies wasting money or burning money, as we might say in the tech area, make the best decisions and reduce your risk as much as possible. I've developed a mind map which outlines the process I go through. As you can see, it's quite detailed, but each video will just drill down into one area and look at the area for each week and take you through the steps so you can see what's going on. If you would prefer to have a chat about this, we can set up a 1 hour free strategy session. Just hit me up at askmarsh.com. So this week we're looking at research. Research is on the surface in the 21st century quite simple because it's really just, can't we just Google everything? And the answer is, of course, you can't just Google everything. There's a whole bunch of reasons why Google is designed to point you in certain directions. Google is designed to maximize their advertising income. And there are ways that companies that aren't that good can actually appear much better because they have good, what's called search engine optimization. And this is a little bit of a dark art through backlinking and a whole bunch of other things. So sometimes you find that the company with the best software or the best hardware, if they don't have the best marketing department, they may not make it. And you may not be able to learn about them just through Googling. So we can start off, of course, talking about search engines and the possibilities. And you do start with a search engine. You might start with a question. You might start with just wanting to know, is there a solution to my problem? It's a great place to get an idea of what's going on and what the market might look like on the surface. But even with search engines, you do need to take a deep dive. One thing people forget is don't forget Bing. Google might be the word we use. Bing is Microsoft's software or search engine. A lot of people are defaulting to Bing anyway. That's what they're using. The decisions or the search results on Bing are slightly different to Google. So if you are just going to go down the search engine viewpoint, just don't forget the other one. And there's a few others, but then we might go down the rabbit hole on that. Another area that's sometimes forgotten to be a search engine is LinkedIn. I'm assuming most of the people watching this are familiar with LinkedIn. It's Facebook for business. LinkedIn, lots of good content, lots of written content, lots of what we like to call long form content. And this is where instead of 140 or 280 characters in a tweet, someone might spend a couple of days putting together a really good article or quite a good analysis. As with anything, whenever you're looking at anything that anyone's written, always click on the bio and see where the money comes from. If someone is a Microsoft employee and they're talking about how good the Microsoft solution is, there's possibly a little bit of conflict of interest there. When you're going through LinkedIn, you can look at groups. So groups are basically special interest areas. So if you are a company that does point-to-point courier work, there will be a point-to-point courier work in LinkedIn groups there. And you can talk to people in that group about the technology they've used. Those groups are usually quite open as long as you're not advertising. So as long as you don't go in there and say everyone should use my stuff, if you can go in there and ask a legitimate question, say, I'm considering using software A to solve problem B, there will be people on that group who may have been there beforehand. And people like you. So it's always good to listen to those people. Thought leaders is another one. Thought leaders are, it's a funny term, but thought leaders are maybe people who are on the edge of what's going on. So rather than following the trend, they might be looking at what the next trends are. A really good example is a guy called Ian Kerr on the Postal Hub podcast. Quite cutting edge stuff in the last mile delivery space and worth looking into because often the thought leaders attract other thought leaders as well. And you can see what's going on in the big picture. The other thing you need to do when you're looking at these areas is look overseas. So when we're doing our research, sorry, let's put that back where it was. When we're looking at our research, we don't need to look just locally. We need to look at what's going on in a global marketplace. Logistics in particular is a field where the problems we face in different countries are quite similar, even though the jurisdictions and everything else might be quite different. So look at what's obviously going on in your local market, but also look at what's going on globally. If you're an Australian company, what's going on in the US and Europe? Similar markets, Western cultures, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. New Zealand, as well. A lot of companies try out new stuff in New Zealand first before they take it global. It's a very interesting market to look at logistics and technology. So it's worth checking out. Your research also look around existing vendors. So companies you're already working with, what are they doing to solve the problem that you're doing? So what are their recommendations? What are they seeing in other companies that are like yours when they've had to solve the same problem? Again, just a word of caution, if they say, well, you need to use our plugins or you need to use ours, just maybe take that with a grain of salt, but ask to speak to the customers that they've got elsewhere and see what's going on. The other place you can go is market leaders. So the people, it could be your DHLs, your FedExes. In Australia, it might be, don't know who it would be in Australia, but globally, it might be a DHL or a FedEx. Look at what those companies are doing. What are they implementing? The scale might be completely different to the scale you're working on, but it's definitely worth checking out from the point of view of seeing what do they do or how are they tackling the problems as they go along. So when you stop looking at market leaders, have a look at similar companies. What are people like you doing? It's safe to assume that people who are still in business, especially now we've been through the GFC 10 years ago, and now we're going through the COVID FC and whatever else. Companies that are still in business, what are they doing? And these might be competitors to yours. So the intel might be a little bit harder to come by, but you might know someone, you might meet them at the football or something when we go back to that. But also your partners. What are the companies that you collaborate with in different geographical areas, in different marketplaces? What have they done to solve those problems? And again, asking the question, how have you solved this problem? It's a huge step, and it's what we do when we research. And also when you're researching with people you know or people you've met, there's a little bit of validity around what they're saying as well. And that validity can be a little bit different to the review sites. So there are a number of review sites, and we can talk about them in more detail later. I'm always curious about where the review came from and what the encouragement or incentive was on the reviewer. In particular, look for companies that pay people to write reviews. Now, reviews may be so-called trusted or so-called optimized or vetted or verified. Sometimes they're not. So it's worth looking at that. It's worth looking at reviews that do comparisons. There's a number of blogs, for example, that will do comparison reviews. So they'll show you at a really high level why they think different sets of software are different, or they might even be able to outline the differences for you. That's quite valuable. And again, especially in Australia, you're going to find a lot of US content around that. So it's worth bearing in mind that the challenges of the market might be different. For example, the definition of a broker as opposed in Australia and the US is completely different. So it's just worth looking at how those different businesses run and the context within which the review was done. So we can review trusted content, and you also may even the reviews may even have been done by people who now work for you. So looking at your own employees and your own staff and the people who work with you internally can be extremely valuable. Another place to look is consultants. So there are companies or people that specialize in logistics tech. You can check the best one out at Ask Marsh. There are people who work in this area and they're always looking at what's going on. They're working with a whole bunch of different companies, looking at what are different challenges that are coming, that have been, and how they've been handled. When talking to consultants, there's a couple of things to look for. The first is you need to look for whether they're a pay-for-service or a commission agent. So some consultants are basically just reps for companies, but they're a rep at large, for example. So they may appear on the surface to be someone who is prepared to talk to you about any solution, but they may be largely rewarded for the work they bring on, which is fine, but you need to know that up front. So you need to know that the person who's coming to talk to you about all the solutions is incentivized to provide you one or two solutions, and just make sure that's transparent. The other option is a pay for service. So you bring in a consultant, say, I'm going to pay you X to help me run this project, but I want this to be an independent project. I need to be assured that you're not going to be incentivized to bring in someone else. So these consultants can sometimes come in and run a couple of day strategy session, for example, or an afternoon session, and just open your mind and just talk to you about what's going on out there, help you ensure you're asking the right questions and those sort of things. When you bring in the consultant, you can either do them for ad hoc work, just bring them in on this one project, or you can look at a longer term strategic approach to them as well. And again, the questions you ask them, just make sure that you're looking at exactly what their incentive is to provide the different answers so that you know you're getting the best solution you want. Because the goal with research really is to minimize the risk that you're going to be completely wasting yours and everyone else's time and money on bringing in a software or hardware solution that doesn't work at all. And it's the goal is to maybe get really quickly down to the 2 or 3 solutions you should be looking at so that you and your team can then go and invest the time required in going through a process of vetting, analyzing and understanding the solutions you want to work with. So that's the research step. So we're going to close this one off here. As always, I'm available at askmarsh.com if you have any questions. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And we'll talk soon. Thanks a lot.